Welcome, everybody. Welcome. I can see a few people still look at us, and more people will join as we go. But firstly, a huge welcome to everyone who's here. Welcome to the Insight PBS's Positive Pathways webinar series. My name's Jess Kaufman-Wood. I'm the Clinical Manager here at Insight, and we're just delighted to have you join us today. This series has been designed to lay out the foundation for understanding and implementing positive behaviour support. Our goal here really is to introduce you to some core concepts, practical strategies that empower professionals, families and community members alike to drive positive change for the people we all support. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So today we're joined by Taya, who's one of our incredible proficient practitioners here at Insight PBS, and she'll be presenting on understanding behaviour support plans. Now, how the session will work today is that shortly I'll hand over to Taya to deliver her main presentation, which will last approximately 40-45 minutes. We encourage you to submit your questions at any time using the QA function. I'll be monitoring that chat and may address some questions during the presentation if I can. We'll also have a dedicated 10 or so minutes at the end for some Q&A to discuss any of the questions in more details that come up in the chat. If we don't get around to them all, we encourage you to email us and we'll get back to you as best we can. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and a replay will be sent to all registered attendees, usually within 24 hours. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Taya to begin today's presentation on understanding behaviour support plans. Thanks, Taya.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. So yeah, as Jess mentioned, I am a behaviour support practitioner with Insight PBS. And today's webinar is going to go over understanding behaviour support plans, which is a key component of positive behaviour support practitioners' roles. Please note that I am based in WA, but I have tried to make this as general as possible, really just taking focus from the NDIS templates to sort of make it as broad and applicable to everyone. We will be covering some sort of more general perspectives of this space, so hopefully, yeah, everyone can sort of understand. But if you do have any specific questions to your state, we can try our best to answer them during the Q&A. But yeah, best to speak to sort of someone in your state if necessary. So today's topics. So running through what is a behaviour support plan, quickly touching on the differences between interim behaviour support plans and comprehensive behaviour support plans, how to effectively develop a behaviour support plan and how to implement behaviour support plans. And then, like we said at the end, there'll be some time for Q&A and feedback. So the key learning outcomes is what is a behaviour support plan and what's included in them, key differences between the interim and comprehensives, how to effectively support the development and how to effectively implement them. Just a bit of housekeeping. I think sometimes I do write BSP in the slides. That does mean behaviour support plan, just to avoid any confusion for everybody. So about me, just really quickly, I'm a proficient prac. I've been with Insight for a couple of years now. It's been amazing. And before that, I was a support worker. So as I've sort of written there on the screen, my experience as a support worker has really shaped how I do my behaviour support role. And I really take a strong focus on working collaboratively with support teams. I think, ensuring that support teams are really knowledgeable and understanding of the participant they are supporting is really the key to having a successful experience for everybody, and ensuring that we are upholding the human rights and dignity of the participant we are supporting. So part of that is behaviour support plans and what we sort of include in them and the roles providers and families play in that. So that's sort of what we're touching on today. So behaviour support plans, what's included in them? I firstly just wanted to sort of touch on behaviour support as a general concept and the goal of it. So behaviour support includes implementing strategies and supports that address the reasons why a participant may display behaviours of concern. It's a support for participants to meet their individual needs and will help those that support them. Behaviour support should use evidence-based practice and be in line with NDIS legislation and policy framework. And overall, the NDIS outlines that behaviour support aims to increase quality of life, understand the reasons for behaviours, find ways to meet the needs of the participant, and reduce and manage behaviours over time. So this is done by creating individual behaviour support plans, basically. So that's what we're here to talk about. I'm just having a technical difficulty trying to change my slide. Sorry, bear with me. See if I go that way. No, okay. My goodness. Sorry, Jess. I don't know what's just happened. Hang on a second.
Oh, good. Feel free to stop sharing and then start sharing again.
I might do that. Sorry, team. Let me just.
It did work for the first few.
Yeah. Okay, let me try that again. So, sharing. I'm going to go like that. Are we back? Everyone can see.
Back.
For some reason, it's not. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, now it's changing. Beautiful.
Okay. We're back. Sorry, everybody. Thanks for your patience. Of course, there had to be something, and I'm glad it was at the start. Okay. So just touching on the NDIS requirements and legislative obligations. So behaviour support does run under a framework. So we do have some policy guidance to guide what our role is and our expectations. So part of that being developing behaviour support plans in consultation with people with disability and the people who support them. Provide people with disability and their supports with behaviour support plans and other information, especially in relation to the use of regulated restrictive practices. Support the effective implementation of behaviour support plans and measure, monitor and evaluate outcomes, including improvements in quality of life, behaviour change, and steps to reduce and eliminate restrictive practices. So that sort of helps guide why we do what we do and why we ask for the information that we ask for as behaviour support practitioners. It is not wanting me to change slides. Why is it doing this to me today? I might go that way. Okay, so what's included in behaviour support plans? So there's three key things that all behaviour support plans do include, and they're required to include. So that is identifying behaviours of concern, identifying restrictive practices used by families or providers, and then including a number of proactive strategies designed to support skill development for both the participant and their supports. So behaviours of concern. So behaviours of concern are behaviours displayed by a participant that may cause harm to them or others or impact their quality of life. This does not include behaviours that are simply abnormal or related to their diagnosis, such as stimming. For example, skipping a shower every now and again would not be considered a behaviour of concern. However, if a person refuses to shower, leading to high risks of infection or illness, this may be considered a behaviour of concern and would be directly addressed in the plan. The NDIS does outline titles used to describe behaviours of concern, which I've got there on the screen as a direct screenshot. We appreciate that sometimes these titles can be really confronting, especially for family members when words like aggression and things like that are being used. So unfortunately, these titles can't be altered by us in the plan when we're describing the behaviour. However, throughout the plan, alternative names may be used at the discretion of the behaviour support practitioner to allow a more strength-based format. So this might be using words such as outbursts for verbal aggression instead of keeping that word aggression throughout the plan. When including behaviours of concern, the goal is to focus on the most significant, whether that be due to risks of harm for the participant or others. So please keep this in mind when reading through plans. If you do ever feel like a behaviour has been missed or it's not included in the plan that you think it should be, always reach out to your behaviour support practitioner for guidance on this or further explanation. So restrictive practices. Restrictive practices are generally used in the context of keeping people and or others safe in relation to a behaviour of concern that the participant may be engaging in. So we're hoping that you have attended our previous webinar that looks a little bit more closely on this. So I'm not going to delve too much into that today, but I did want to give a quick summary of the 5 restrictive practices. So seclusion is defined as confining a person to a room or area by themselves where they're not able or they believe they are not able to leave. Chemical restraint is the use of medication or chemical substance for the primary purpose of influencing a person's behaviour or movement. Physical restraint is the use or action of physical force to prevent, restrict, or subdue movement of a person's body or part of their body for the primary purpose of influencing a person's behaviour. Mechanical restraint is the use of a device to prevent, restrict, or subdue a person's movement or to control a person's movement. And environmental restraint involves restricting a person's free access to all parts of their environment, including items or activities. So if these are required, they should always adhere to the following. They should be used as a last resort in response to risk of harm. They should be the least restrictive option that ensures safety of the person and others. They should reduce the risk of harm to the person or others and be in proportion to the risk of harm to the person or others. And finally, be used for the shortest possible time to ensure the safety of the person or others. And we also then have proactive strategies. So proactive strategies are those that work best when implemented whilst the participant is at their baseline. So this means they are calm and regulated. And it's important to note that a participant's baseline behaviour may look different for everyone. So I've sort of got on the screen there what behaviour sort of looks like in terms of someone's baseline. Then you might start to see early warning signs, escalation. That peak escalation is likely to be that behaviour of concern. And then it comes back down to recovery at the end. So it's really important that proactive strategies are those that are implemented at that baseline. So proactive strategies aim to provide support teams with guidance about the best ways to support the participant. They support safety and well-being. They build on the participant's strengths and they look at ways to build capacity and help the participant connect with their mainstream and community supports to support the NDIS goal achievement. And lastly, they support increasing life skills for the participant, like doing day-to-day activities. So, interim behaviour support plans and comprehensive behaviour support plans, I'm sure they're all words we've all heard before, but what does that really mean and what's the difference between them? So it's important to note that the timelines and requirements for interim and behaviour support plans are dictated by the NDIS. They must be completed within 1 month of behaviour support practitioners being engaged. So that is really quite a quick turnaround for behaviour support practitioners, especially when there can be quite a big team involved. So interim behaviour support plans include restrictive practices and they must be submitted to the NDIS for authorisation. Initial behaviour support plans follow the same structure but do not include restrictive practices. So that's sort of the difference between those two key titles. Both are valid for 6 months to allow time for the development of a comprehensive behaviour support plan. And the table of contents shown there, again, is a direct screenshot from the NDIS template that outline key components required in this plan. So that can include the risks of harm or behaviours of concern, preventative and response strategies, and regulated restrictive practices, ensuring we maintain both compliance and quality of support. So these plans are really quick. The turnaround is fast. They are not always, ironically comprehensive in their formatting. So there can be things that maybe aren't described the best. There can be limitations in terms of information gathered during that time frame. But they're really there as a foundation, and importantly, they're there to support authorization of restrictive practices that might be in use. So that's really why there's a push to get these out really fast. So comprehensive behaviour support plans. These must be completed within 6 months of the initial or interim BSP. And unlike earlier plans, so unlike the interim, they also are accompanied by a functional behaviour assessment. So this involves collecting detailed assessment data to support evidence-based strategies that are tailored to the person's needs. A key difference is the level of detail. So the comprehensive plan includes much greater information around behaviour goals, proactive strategies, skill development, and long-term supports. Again, you'll see in the contents list that it goes deeper into why the behaviour occurs and how to build skills to replace those behaviours. So like interim BSPs, if the plan includes restrictive practices, it must be submitted to the NDIS for authorisation. However, the comprehensive plan is valid for 12 months once it's completed. So it is reviewed and updated annually, ensuring it evolves with the individual's progress and support needs. It is important to note that if you do change providers, so you change to a different behaviour support provider, they often do have to start the process again with an interim and then a comprehensive behaviour support plan. It's because we can't edit and adapt and change other providers' plans. So although we appreciate that sometimes with funding restrictions, it can be very frustrating, it is a part of the process we have to follow, especially if restrictive practices are in place. So any help and support, these are obviously done as quick as they can be done to reduce that funding being used. But yeah, just so that it's everyone's aware that if providers are changed, those plans do have to be completed again by the new provider. So to summarise the key differences, interim behaviour support plans are short-term and they're created quite quickly, especially if restrictive practices are in place. They're valid for 6 months, and then comprehensive plans are a lot more in-depth. They require assessments and data collection. They include more intensive strategies, and they're reviewed annually. So the development of behaviour support plans. So on the screen, I've got a few screenshots from, again, it's the NDIS has developed a template that all specialist behaviour support providers must adhere to. However, the providers can interpret these templates and present the information in a format they develop themselves. So you may definitely come across lots of different variations of behaviour support plans. However, they all should contain the same key information. So despite how they're presented, the key takeaway is ensuring that the information is in a format that is achievable and easy to follow to support effective implementation. So if you're ever unsure if the behaviour support plan is missing any key information, don't hesitate to reach out to your practitioners or bring it to their attention. An easy read format should always be available upon request. So again, please don't hesitate to reach out if you ever feel like you would like that, or the participant would like a copy. An easy read is their preferred option. So behaviours of concern, a little bit more information on this. So there's several important components related to behaviours of concern that must be included in the behaviour support plan, including describing the behaviour, talking about frequency, intensity, setting events, sort of all those things there described on the screen. So often behaviour support practitioners won't directly witness the behaviours of concern, especially in their most escalated forms. So that's why it's really crucial for providers and family members to share the detailed information to us. This helps us ensure that the plan is both accurate and effective in addressing the behaviour. So to gather this information, the practitioner may request access to shift notes, case notes, incident reports, or observations that cover anywhere from the most recent to 12 months prior. This helps us really understand the frequency, duration, triggers, and context of the behaviour. It's also important to be aware that the NDIS sets out specific requirements for implementing providers to support this process. These include sharing relevant information to assist us in developing these plans. So on the screen there is a QR code that sort of takes you straight to that NDIS guideline for providers. So usually once an interim is in place, so that's that very first plan that gets pushed through quite quickly, there can often be a behaviour tracking tool included in this. This tool may differ per provider. However, they're designed to make it easier for support staff and families to input the behaviours really quickly and make sure that we're sort of ticking that information that we need in order to complete this sort of template. If you ever feel like the tracking tools provided to you by a provider, by a behaviour support practitioner, is not useful or in some way doesn't really meet your needs, always reach out and let them know. We'd rather know that information and adapt where we can than just not be receiving the information at all. So restrictive practices. So I wanted to touch on basically what we are required to include in a behaviour support plan. So the providers and families, you guys can sort of understand why we ask the questions that we ask. And it's not just to be nosy or annoying. It's actually a requirement of us to sort of answer these questions. This information supports authorization. I'm not going to go into what authorization looks like for each state because I know they're all different, and us in WA, it's quite an intensive process. So really, the more information that the practitioners have, the easier that authorization process is for providers. So it's really, you guys help us, we help you in the end. So as you can see, there's a fair amount of information required to support the approval of a restrictive practice. This information is in both the interim and the comprehensive behaviour support plans. So the NDIS really sets out clear elements that must be met to ensure restrictive practices are only in use when required to support the safety of the individual. So it's a bit of a safeguarding process as well. So key elements that must be included in the rationale section is restrictions must be proportionate to the risk that the behaviour may cause. They must be the least restrictive. So, for example, the use of a mechanical or physical restraint when someone tries to access food in the fridge is certainly more restrictive than simply requiring an environmental restraint such as supervision to use the fridge. So we're sort of needing to justify that it's the least restrictive option and that other options have also been tried first. So the restraint must be used in relation to reducing risk of harm. So why does it work and what behavior is it addressing? So the most important thing for restrictive practices is they must be addressing a behavior of concern that's also included in the plan. So that's a really important element to remember. And a restraint must only be used as a last resort. And so reporting what strategies have been used first, including what are still in place, those that have been suggested by allied health professionals, and also previously used strategies that didn't work and why is really important to include. It may also include strategies that are outlined in the behaviour support plan that are proactive, such as redirection to visual aids or the use of effective communication to support understanding. And finally, this section also has to include has to basically justify that the restraint is used for the shortest time possible in relation to both the restraint itself and and how it's going to be faded out. So on top of all of those 5 key things, there's all that other information in there. So every restrictive practice protocol table must be included and done for every restraint type that is in place. So it's imperative that providers and families are a part of this process and understanding these key elements. So again, you understand why we ask those questions. It's not to judge or to make you feel like you're doing something incorrect. It's really just to understand so that we can both educate you as providers and family members to ensure that we are really upholding the rights of the person that we're supporting and making sure that they're as safe as possible, as well as the staff and family are as safe as possible. And a key goal, as we sort of said at the start, is really to reduce and eliminate those restrictive practices. So that last part on the table there relating to that really needs to highlight how we're going to do that. And again, it's a really collaborative process with providers and families, because we don't want to just say stop immediately and everyone then suddenly feels unsafe or the participant isn't being supported effectively. So we appreciate that they do need to be faded out, but yeah, please always be a part of that conversation with us. So chemical restraints are a little bit different. They do require a little bit more information, things to do with the medication itself, the prescribing practitioner, and when the last reviews are. Again, this is just ensuring that we're keeping the safety of the participant at the forefront and that medications are being regularly reviewed. So this information is available when the purpose of medication form is completed correctly by the prescribing doctor. So please ensure these are as accurate and up to date as possible and completed in full to ensure a smooth authorization process for everyone. So I have completed a screenshot on the screen of this document, and there's also the QR code. We'll take you straight to it for more information, but it is available through the NDIS really easily. So the key information is basically everything on the screen. We really need to understand what the medication is and why it's being prescribed. And definitely if option A is being ticked by the doctor, we're needing to understand what that diagnosis is. and don't be surprised if a practitioner then asks for sort of more information around that diagnosis, especially if it's the first time they've heard of it. We sort of need to understand where it's all coming from and sort of line all the dots together. If for the purpose of influencing behaviour, it is always good to understand what that behaviour might be. So if there is the option, the doctor's happy to write down or can understand if it is in relation to a specific type of behaviour, especially if they're PRN medication, so they're not routine. It's good to understand sort of when staff are using it and in relation to what behaviour. Potential side effects are also good to know. This is both for providers and practitioners, so that that information can be shared across all environments as well. So the more information, the better is basically the takeaway from all of this with restrictive practices. You can never overshare. Practitioners will decide what's relevant and not relevant, but the more information, the easier it is for everybody, and the safer we can make sure the participant is that we're all supporting. So how to implement behaviour support plans. So basically we've gone through the development and now you've been given that plan, and how are we going to implement it? How are we going to work together is basically the next part we're going to chat about. So there's 4 key elements to do with effectively implementing a plan. So training is the first component of effectively implementing these plans. Training may include a range of topics, but should cover key proactive strategies that support skill development for both the participant and their support team or family, as well as guidelines around the use of restrictive practices that have or have not been authorised, and the proactive strategies that may support reduction in the use of restrictive practices. If training is ever not instigated by the behaviour support practitioner, I really ask that providers and families reach out to ensure this occurs as soon as possible once the plan has been finalised. Training is super important in ensuring that the goals of behaviour support are met, such as increasing quality of life through skill development or reduction in the use of restrictive practices. So after we've been trained on what the strategies are that are included in the plan, we then need to implement these strategies. So strategy implementation can really occur from initial engagement with a behaviour support practitioner. They don't necessarily need a plan in place. These may occur through initial conversations and meetings, through feedback that providers or families are giving the practitioner. But formal implementation is usually outlined in the plan, which should give a step-by-step on how to actually implement. So training obviously supports that, where practice can occur, feedback can be provided, but it's really important that we're all implementing the plans as outlined across all environments. So this helps with consistent and effective implementation, and really supports the participants sort of with their clear expectations. So they're not sort of getting different strategies, at home versus at the day program, for example. That can be really confusing and confronting for a participant. So it's really important that we're all using the same strategies. It just really helps with that effective implementation and keeping really good communication with everyone. Always reach out to your practitioner if you feel like the training provided or the information in the plan is not sufficient to support implementation. Again, that you should really outline a step-by-step process. And sometimes, unfortunately, we see plans where they're just a one sentence and it's sort of up to interpretation. It's not really good enough. We really need it to be really clear. So always reach out, never hesitate to clarify or seek more information. So whilst we're implementing, we also really want to be monitoring how these strategies are going. It ensures that the strategies outlined in the plan are actually working and effective for the participant and their support team or family. So monitoring may occur through regular care team meetings, regular observation visits, and review of behaviour tracking data and case notes supplied by providers and family. The frequency of meetings or observations can depend on funding levels, but again, always reach out if you feel like there could be more observations. The key goal would be to observe in every environment, although I know with scheduling and funding and things that can be really tricky, and that's why that behaviour tracking data or those case notes are really essential in that monitoring phase as well. And lastly, communication. So communication is the foundation for effective implementation. Communication with not only those implementing the plan, but also the participant ensures the strategies are effective and any concerns or questions are able to be addressed as soon as possible. So communication may be in the form of an email thread used to update everybody, regular phone calls, or in-person visits to the participant to gain first-hand account of progress with strategy implementation. Multidisciplinary meetings can also be used to ensure the right people are supporting implementation. For example, an occupational therapist is supporting strategies around sensory needs, or a speech pathologist is supporting training to do with communication devices. So communication really is the key to meeting the goals of behaviour support, as without effective and ongoing communication, it's difficult to understand if the needs of the participant are being met, if behaviours are being reduced, and if we're sort of meeting the requirements around reducing and managing restrictive practices. So the importance of feedback. I'm a big feedback person. I think feedback is really such a key part of our role. It's so integral to how we do our job from the first moment we meet. So feedback should begin from initial engagement with behaviour support practitioners. So this can really include feedback on previous engagement with behaviour support, other practitioners, plans that you've received, strategies that you've put in place previously. This really ensures that the ongoing support from a behaviour support practitioner is really effective and really working with the team with what they need, as well as the participant. Feedback can also be provided through the observations or meeting with the participant to discuss previous or current strategies, and what does and doesn't work and what they may think will work in the future. So feedback can be ideas, as crazy as they might be. You know, people that work with participants, you guys are there more than practitioners. You know, we come and go. You guys are the foundation of their support. So any sort of feedback that you can give us is really such important knowledge for us. You guys, like I said, sort of know them best. So if it's around how you communicate with the person, strategies that may work for you but others aren't using, it's really important that we know that, so that we can make sure, again, that everybody in every environment is using the best strategies possible to support the participant. Feedback can then also occur, like we've sort of discussed, once the plan's being developed and before it's finalised. So this is ensuring that information about the participant is really accurate and current. So usually, I know at Insight, what we do is we'll do our plan, we'll then send it for feedback, and then ask for that to come back to us before we finalise. So it really just makes sure that, you know, the sections like about the participant are really accurate. So things like their likes and dislikes, their current routine, because often, you know, we might know that information at the start during the initial engagement, but sometimes by the time a plan's completed, especially comprehensives, you know, they're 6 months down the line. Often it's not always up to date. So yeah, it's really important that we do get that feedback from you. Again, there's never such a thing as too much feedback, I think. So yeah, always reach out if you think something's no longer accurate in the plans. And lastly, like we've discussed, feedback needs to occur throughout the implementation and monitoring phases of behaviour support plans to ensure strategies are implemented correctly. Changes can be made to better meet the needs of the participant and the support team. So like we've sort of said, the more feedback, the better. Implementation really requires everyone to be on the same page. So if one person sort of isn't sure on how to do something, we need to really understand that and make sure that that training is being provided. So like I've said, feedback, always provide it every step of the way. Never hesitate. It's really, again, such an integral part of behaviour support and making sure that we really achieve those goals outlined by the NDIS, and making sure the participant is really heard and listened to throughout the whole process as well. So some common challenges for behaviour support and how to address them. So the biggest one is really inaccurate or ineffective completion of case notes or shift notes, incident reports or behaviour tracking tools. So like we sort of discussed, understanding the behaviour, the frequency, the triggers, it's all really key components to sort of making sure that what we're doing is working, that the strategies we're putting in place are working, that everyone is well trained and understands how to use those strategies. So if we're not receiving any data back to us about the frequency of those behaviours, we sort of don't really get that knowledge and that awareness of what's in place is working for us. So a really, sort of easy way to address this is to upskill. So for providers to upskill support staff to ensure that the shift notes are comprehensive and accurately represent behaviours displayed. So this can be using like the ABC model that sort of addresses antecedents, behaviours and concerns. So triggers, behaviours and sort of the outcomes, basically what the result was of those behaviours, whether that be harm to self or others. And then it's also letting the behaviour support practitioner know that if you feel like the tracking tools provided are too difficult or not efficient, so that these can be adapted. We appreciate that, support staff have shift notes to complete, and then if they also then have an incident report to complete, and then we're trying to ask them to complete our version of a tracking tool, there's not enough time in the day sometimes, and I totally get that from my own experience. So we definitely want to make it as easy as possible for everybody. So yeah, definitely always reach out. It's better for you to tell us that feedback than just not to complete it or not send that information to us. So yeah, again, always with that feedback, it's really key to making sure we can all do our job more effectively. Another key challenge is misunderstandings around the language used in behaviour support plans. This can be really prevalent for families. As again, I've sort of outlined, we appreciate that the wording can often be quite confronting, especially around describing behaviours. Unfortunately, it is the case of having to describe the worst day, not the best day. This not only sort of makes sure that support teams can sort of understand what to expect if strategies aren't in place, but it also sort of outlines and supports funding needs and things like that as well. So yeah, we do really appreciate that sometimes that wording can be confronting. It's really not it's not what we want. So again, we really do want the goal to be using a strength-based and person-centered plans. So wherever possible, the best language that we can use will be used. Strategies will be person-centered, adapted to the person that we're talking about. We always include sections, like strengths of the person, their likes and things like that, so that we sort of are developing a whole person picture. And it's not really just all about their behaviours. So although the plan addresses that, we do understand that, there is still a person behind the plan. So really to address that, again, we're appreciating the fact that that wording does exist and the limitations we have on that front. However, yeah, the goal is to develop those strength-based and person-centered plans. So always provide feedback if you're unsure about the wording. And please don't let it be a barrier to ongoing engagement. The worst thing is really to sort of give a plan and then never hear from anybody because they felt really upset about the wording used. I'd rather hear that feedback and we can work on it together, or practitioners can better educate families and providers about why the language had to be used, or make adaptations to the plan if the feedback is valid and those plans can be changed. And lastly is disengagement or reduced communication with behaviour support practitioners. So this is one that everyone across the board experiences. We can appreciate that sometimes behaviour support is brought on by support coordinators. Maybe our role is not effectively communicated to families or providers. There can be confusion about the limitations to our roles or the boundaries to our roles. So definitely the NDIS website has a really great brief about what behaviour support is and what behaviour support practitioners do. It's important to know that we aren't like allied health in that sense, although some people might have the dual role. Behaviour support is really to sort of support the people that support the participant. So we really are around education, psychoeducation, education around strategies, education around environmental changes that we can make for the participant to support their quality of life. So things like mental health support is really, and sort of support around things where the occupational therapist or the speech pathologist are really the key trained people. You'll often be referred to access those supports instead of behaviour support. I don't know where I was going with all of that, but basically just understand we do have limitations to our role, but that doesn't mean we don't want to engage in the way that we can and that we're sort of there to do. So always reach out to us to communicate how it's best to engage with the participant and their support team, whether that be times of day, emails or phone calls, video calls, in person. We really want to understand how best to communicate with the participant and their care team, and adapting that wherever we can to make sure it's effective for everybody to keep that engagement going. Disengaging from us can be really limiting, and really it's not always the best for the participant, especially if we're having those restrictive practices in place. The goal is to reduce them. Again, we're not there to judge if they're being used. We're there to understand and educate wherever possible, and eliminate the use of them when it's safe to do so. So always communicate with us. Never be afraid to communicate. The goal is to educate and not tell you off. So, we're not there to we're not the overarching bodies. We're there to really support you guys. So always reach out and ask your questions. There's never a silly question when it comes to behaviour support. That's sort of how we can address those key challenges. So the key takeaways. This is sort of the last bit for me, so we sort of ran through it quite quickly. So the key takeaways for providers and families. So through the development of a plan, it's really important that you firstly just engage with the behaviour support practitioner. That's really number one, whether that be as much or as little as you can. It's important that we sort of understand everything that we can about the participant, their support team, and the environments they interact with. So with that comes with supporting observations in all of the different environments, providing up-to-date case notes and observation reports, incident reports, being open and honest about the use of restrictive practices. Again, like I said, we're not there to judge. We're really there to help educate and understand and keep everybody safe. And support the gathering of reports and purpose of medication forms. All that information really helps us develop our plan. And then once we're developing that plan, it makes everyone's role really easy, to be honest. So we can then go on to that implementation. It also means if you also help us develop the plan, we're spending less time chasing that information. So funding's a really big concern. You guys helping us helps us help you in that sense. So the faster we can develop a plan, obviously the less funding we're using on that step, and we can really focus on that implementation of strategies. So please keep that in mind, that us chasing you up is costing everybody money. It's always best if providers and families can be as proactive as possible in providing us with the information. Also know that, we don't ask questions we don't need the information for. As I said, there are requirements the NDIS lays out in terms of the templates for our plans. We're really only trying to gather the data we need to ensure we're using evidence-based strategies, and we're developing strategies that make sense for the participant. So we're never asking questions we don't have to. So please, really just let us know. And if you're ever concerned, especially I understand providers sometimes can be hesitant to share information, feel free to bring the family on board or the guardian on board to those discussions, and really avoid just disengaging from us. It just makes the process harder for everybody in that development stage. So implementation. So again, engage with the plan. This can be through reading the plan, asking for easy read documents, asking for summary documents, attending training and participating in training. It's one thing to sit through a training session. It's another to actually engage and effectively use and implement the strategies. So we really implore you, especially if they're online training sessions, cameras on, ask those questions, raise your hand. It's really important that you're really engaging so you can understand the information being provided to you. Again, being open and honest about the use of restrictive practices, including any changes to frequency or any increase or decrease in the use, or any new restrictive practices. So it's never just one conversation around restrictive practices. Behaviour support plans are a live document. They change and adapt as we go on. It's not just done at the start and then looked at again in 12 months. They can be adapted and changed as needed. To make sure that they are adhering to those restrictive practice authorizations. And they also make sure that they reflect the current circumstances. If someone's moving house, halfway between, they're 6 months into a comprehensive, we're going to have to redo those sorts of plans to make sure they accurately reflect that new environment. because it can really change what strategies we're putting in place. And also during the implementation stage, it's important to know restrictive practices need to be, people implementing restrictive practices, need to be NDIS registered. So making sure that that process is happening as well. And so once we've sort of started that implementation process, we are moving on to monitoring. So again, to summarize, it's really making sure we're engaging in those regular meetings with behaviour support practitioners, ensuring the strategies are effective. So this is where that feedback really comes in. We don't want to keep harping on as practitioners. We don't want to keep trying to tell you to use a strategy that is not going to work. If you're not going to tell us, how do we know that information? So it's really important that you guys are sharing that with us during that monitoring phase. And any barriers as well that you might find that we didn't think of at the time, or that might have come up through change in supports or change in environments. It's really important that we're made aware of this so we can make sure that we're updating those strategies and supporting you more effectively, really. Ensuring behaviour data tracking tools are completed accurately is really important, like I've already sort of spoken about a few times, and providing those case notes, observations, and incident reports to support that data gathering. So data gathering is really a key component. It's often not considered as important as it really is for us. It helps us understand if behaviours are reducing, if they're increasing, and so we can understand why. It supports the use of restrictive practices. So we need to, as people that help report and authorise those restrictive practices, we need to understand that those behaviours are occurring and why, so we can also support the elimination of them as well. So you can never give us too much data. In any format that it comes, we will take it. So never hesitate to just send through incident reports or jump on the phone call and update us via phone or in-person meetings. So yeah, that is sort of the key takeaways of sort of what we've gone through today. I think that's it from me, Jess. So
beautiful. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Taya. Yes, I love that you've really emphasised feedback. A very strong feedback culture here at Insight, and not like both internally and externally. So that's fabulous. I can see some really great questions in the chat that I might start addressing now. The first one was, when you say the restrictive practice must be for a behaviour of concern listed in the plan, do you mean BSP or the client's NDIS plan? And so, yes, we are talking about the BSP plan. So essentially every restrictive practice that is included has to be linked to one of the behaviours that have been listed further up in the plan. So I guess, it's part of, what makes it a restrictive practice. It's a practice that is implemented because of a behaviour of concern. So yeah, hope that answers that question. The next one is, do clients with an existing BSP that is introduced to RP need a new interim or just an updated BSP? This is a little bit of a tricky one and definitely depends on, I can already see your face there, definitely depends a bit on what the situation is and where we are in the plan. So essentially, for example, if we don't identify an RP straight away and maybe a few months down the track we've already done the initial, there's no RPs, and then suddenly RPs get put in place, then we would introduce an interim RP plan, because from identifying we need to have that up in PRODA in 30 days. If, for example, there's an interim plan in place and we're working on the comprehensive, we identify a restrictive practice, we potentially can amend that plan. We would have to re-upload it to PRODA. However, it kind of depends. So we're kind of making a bit of a judgment call sometimes, because if we've already started developing the comprehensive and we're, a month out from finalising the comprehensive and we discover a new RP, then we're more likely, instead of wasting funding to do a whole new interim, we would most likely just add it to the comprehensive, because it's going to be uploaded to PRODA and reviewed and authorised then. So sorry, that isn't the most straightforward answer. Is there anything you'd add to that, Taya? Is that kind of...
Honestly, no, it's really a grey area. And again, it can really depend on funding availability as well. So like just was saying, we try and avoid doubling up wherever possible. So it may mean, short-term reporting on an unauthorised restrictive practice. Yes. The goal being that there is that time frame given that there's going to be a new plan in place that can support authorization.
Yeah.
It really is case by case, and it
Yeah.
really does depend on that funding available.
That's a really great point. Great point. Because if there's no funding or it's not going to be realistic, then it is on the provider, for example, the implementing provider, to make sure that they're reporting that in Proto or whatever system that they're using. I know it's called something different in each state sometimes. All right. The next one is training mandatory? I've had a situation where a behaviour specialist and their organisation said that they would not do it. Part of improved relationships funding is funding for training. So there's the two different, I guess, line items, if I'm saying, naming that correctly, but there's one for the specialist behaviour, which is the development of the plan, the assessment phase, the initial, and then there's other funding under a different item called, behaviour training, essentially. The behaviour management or implementation, and that really is for training purposes. So I'm not sure, obviously, what the funding situation was, whether they maybe didn't receive funding for that, but if that funding is there, really training should be done. And here at Insight, we're really big believers in the importance of the actual implementation and training phase, because there's nothing worse than writing a big long plan, and we totally get some of these plans are a lot of pages long, and you can't expect a whole team of support workers, for example, to have time to read through it all. So it really needs to be implemented through training. There's nothing worse than writing a plan and handing it over and sort of going, there you go, and it just sits on a shelf for months. That's really not what we're about. So I would say training is extremely important when it comes to implementing a behaviour support plan.
Yeah, and I think again it comes down to that feedback as well. It might be that maybe they only have an hour worth of funding left, and maybe there's specific questions you can ask and really highlight that you're wanting to really focus on one area. It might put that practitioner at ease that maybe they don't need to use as much funding as they thought, and they can really hone in on something for you as the provider. Or training can occur through observation times as well and things like that, if possible, with the funding. But it's really unfortunate when training can't occur. I agree, Jess. It sort of puts the plans on the back pedal, which is not nice.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got a couple more great questions here. One is, do you include NDIS goals in the plans to demonstrate how behaviours are a barrier to achieving these? We absolutely do. That is part of the template, having NDIS goals in there. In fact, even on our plans, we've got additional sort of personal goals and aspirations of the participant as well. Again, another way that we try to make our plans, far more strength-based and personalised. So, answer to that is yes. Next one we've got is, how much liaising would a behaviour support practitioner have with the authorised program officers at the NDIS provider team? So in terms of APOs at providers, we absolutely encourage our practitioners to be liaising and talking with them as much as possible. It is a slightly different process in various states, but I'm from Victoria, so I know what you mean by APO. Different process in WA where Taya is. But yes, we like to work closely with the APOs during the development of the plan when talking about RPs, ensuring that they're input correctly, that they're that we're on the path to having whatever we need authorised. I think it's a really important collaboration and relationship. So that is absolutely something that we encourage here.
Yeah. And I do, sorry, just to touch on that, although we have APOs, I definitely have experienced some Victorian teams and things like that. And I think it's really important that APOs understand that it's not a battle against should this or shouldn't this be included in a plan. It's really to work together and just report on the information that's given. It's a collaborative approach between behaviour support and APOs. It's not really, for us to, like I said, battle it out and feel like you have to something. Again, like we said, it's not a bad thing to use restrictive practices if they're used in the correct way. And so we're there to support that use of them. So we're not there to sort of put you down or make you feel like you're doing something wrong.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I've got another couple of questions. One is, I'm a registered counsellor and interested in to work as a behaviour support practitioner. Is there any extra training you could recommend? I think, yeah, definitely jump online. We obviously have our series here, but there are certainly other organisations and unis even, I think, that have courses out there that you can jump into to gather more information. And I possibly the NDIS have some more information about how to become a behaviour support practitioner, so it might be worth jumping on that website. Next is, can someone write up a plan but have another practitioner provide the one-to-one support? Look, I think usually we would say try to keep it to the same practitioner, but there may be instances potentially if location is a big barrier or something along those lines. It's something to talk to the provider about. I think if they're in the same organisation, that might be, something that would be, but I wouldn't say, if it was separate providers, that would absolutely be very complicated. But if it's within the same organisation, that might be something to talk to them about if it's required, for whatever the reason is in that context.
Yeah. And I would definitely, just to make sure
that go for it.
Practitioners have read the plan. So even if one practitioner is writing it and one's doing the one-on-one, we need to make sure that they're both involved in that process of development. So that implementation is really clear. So again, it's that feedback. If you feel like that person doing the one-on-one support is not actually understanding of the person, or you feel like maybe they haven't actually read the plan, always provide that feedback so that you're not really sort of missing out or using funds ineffectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And this might be the last question we've got time for, but as a practitioner, how can we manage the NDIS Commission required timeframes for interim FBA, BSP plans, etc., given the new expected changes with the release of funding quarterly? Kerry, that is such a great question. I don't actually even know where to start. It's a really important factor, something that we're actually reviewing very closely at the moment to make sure that we can still meet our legislative obligations when it comes to timeframes. At this stage, I think it's trying to plan ahead, prioritise the amount of, how you're going to use the funding that you do have in that 3-month period, and try to make sure that you can, meet that 30-day requirement with the information that you do have. I definitely don't have the best answer for that at the moment, unfortunately. I think it's something that a lot of providers of PBS are looking into and trying to work out at the moment. So, great question.
And I think with that, Jess, I would say complete the limitation section in your plan. Highlight if there's any funding limitations and what that's meant in terms of doing observations, visits, data tracking, assessment, completion, those sorts of things that, if we're not including it, we're not providing feedback. So I think, definitely making sure we're utilising that limitation section and just being honest, really, what are those limitations to that development of the plan.
Absolutely. And that's where I think the points you've made, Taya, about, communicating with your behaviour support practitioner, providing that information, the more info that you can provide them that they don't have to chase up, is saving funding. So if you provide it to them, they'll be able to make a more comprehensive plan. But unfortunately, it's looking like even if we don't have the information, but we've identified RPs, we must have that plan up and product in 30 days. And that's where the limitation section will have to come in. So it's really unfortunate, but that's kind of what it's looking like at the moment. Yeah. All right, everyone. I'm just conscious of time, so we might have to wrap it up there. Just confirming to everyone, it has been recorded. We have a webinar handout that will come with the recording link that you receive. A huge thank you again to Taya for a wonderful presentation on understanding behaviour support plans. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys.